Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 22nd, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from the Secret Seal Register of Joan. It's Register 1751. Today's document begins with just a few lines on Folio 69R, and most of the document and its real meaning is on Folio 69V. And I just want to point out a couple things about Folio 69R, which is that there's two other documents on it. And those documents are ones that were from June 21st. The second document on the folio is to the Procurator Berenguer Lobet, and it mentions some falcons. So Joan is thinking about going out and doing some falconry, maybe an indication of his feeling okay health-wise. And then at the very bottom, we have Loré, and then the addressee is Gobernador. And if we skip to the end of the document on Folio 69V, we'll see that there's no probata. It has a little note saying, Fuit missa. It was sent. It has been sent. And then if we go further down the page on Folio 69V, we'll see that we have a companion to the document that Violante wrote the day before yesterday to the King of Castile. So that was a general good tidings letter, and Joan's letter to the King of Castile, dated June 23rd, is one that is also kind of a general good tidings and seems to be pretty, I'd say, I mean, there's a couple more specific things in there, but I think it's pretty much in line with the stuff that Violante was saying. And the reason I want to point your attention to this is that there's no probata there either. There's the little brackets for the probata, but nobody has filled it in. And I don't know what to make of that, because it seems like there's no sort of like emergency or crisis that would throw off the Chancery staff at this time. And so it's a little bit of a mystery to me why it is that the probata is missing from the document today, and then also a document dated on the 23rd. Weird. There's actually some other documents in the other folios around this one in this register that have missing probata. Do not know why. All right, let's talk about the content of today's document. I am inferring that it is sent to the Governor of Aragon, making that inference two pieces of information. First, that what's being discussed is the disruption, invasion. Joan himself, in the second line of Folio 69V, calls it Los Scandalos e Males, the scandals and evils. And it's And then also we have the word bandos, which is split between the end of line 1 and the beginning of line 2. So it's kind of easy to miss. And the AI automated agentic AI pipeline, it did miss that. So it's about the bandos, and we've heard about the factions, the groups, the mercenary companies that are causing trouble in the area of the province of Aragon that is close to the Pyrenees. And then we also have at the end of line 4 the word Gascones. And I think that means the people from Gascony, which is a region of France that is on the eastern side of the Pyrenees. And so I think this is discussing the trouble that we've heard about before going on in Aragon, the province of Aragon, and that Joan has sent previous letters to the governor of Aragon in regards to. So that's what I'm thinking, but it is definitely the case that this document does not have the usual kind of addressee information. It doesn't have a probata. It's weird. Not quite sure what the explanation is for that. All right, let's talk about some of the details in the document, and I'm really going to focus on the majority of it, which is on 69V. So, wait a second. I think it's actually, we have to go back. We have to go back to 69R because Joan starts it out by saying, Vostra letra recibiemos e plazernos. So he's happy to have gotten that letter. He's pleased. So this is not one of those documents where we see desplayer or desplazer. He is pleased. And what is he pleased about? That's what we get to in the majority of the document that is on 69V. So what has happened is that the bandos, they have stopped their scandalos e males. So I'll just read from the end of line 1. En aquellos bandos que cesen desaqui los scándalos e males. So the bandos have been stopped. And then Joan goes on to say that he has, and this is the end of line 3, tenemos a corazón y la tierra quede sin ruido. So he has in his heart, so I'm not quite sure the exact translation here, but something about he has his desire that there is no disruption in the land. And so he's telling the governor of Aragon to track down where these people came from, the Gascones, and then as we get into the last 5 lines of the document, he has this really interesting statement about the puertos. So the puertos, the ports, are on line 7. So, que todos los puertos están avisados. So that all of the ports, and I think what he's talking about with ports is really interesting because when we think of a port, we think of something with water. We think of like ships coming to the docks and unloading their goods at the port. But I think that the word port can also mean, like the word is also similar to like the Castilian puerto for like a door, porto. So it's the gateway. So I think we can imagine that when we see the word port, we think of it as the entry to the territory, whether it's by water or by land. And so there are several gateways that are in Aragon and can keep a lookout for more people from Gascony and any other kind of trouble related to what had been going on with the bandos. And so Joan is saying, warn or keep those gateway locations on alert. And also try to figure out, and then this is where we get into the end of line 8, where we have this word at the very end that really stumped me, because it's got a G with a vertical mark above it, and I would take that vertical mark as a abbreviation for like an RI. So when it's above a P, that is often something like a PRI. But this is a G, and I could not get it to make any kind of sense by putting an R in there with all the words that would have a G and an R. And the OpenClaw pipeline output for this document read that as GENT. And I can kind of, now that I'm looking at it, I can kind of see there's like a little tiny crossbar above the G, but I was resistant to that. And so I went to Claude and I gave it a clip from this document. I just cropped out the 3 lines surrounding this line 8 and gave it my best shot at a transcription. And Claude was actually really helpful. It did also say that it meant Gent, Hent. So Esfuerzo de Hent. So like the force of the army, the people. So it's a force of people. It means, it's almost like a synonym for the compañonas that is prior to it in the line, which is like the companies. So the mercenary companies, and then also any forces of soldiers or forces of arms, So, okay, we have here a clause that instructs the governor to warn the ports, and then there's this instruction, and this is where we have sepades at the beginning, toward the beginning of line 8, which is basically to ascertain. And so what Joan is instructing them, the people of who are guarding the ports, the gateways, is to ascertain where the people who are causing trouble had come from, to do some investigation. And then with that information, he's going to provide better suited provisions. So basically, the tide has turned against the forces of chaos in this region of the realm, and it's good news for Joan. It's good news. Joan is starting to get a break from what had seemed to be a steady stream of bad news. And it's quite interesting to notice the coincidence, or is it more than a coincidence, that as Joan has emerged from the danger zone in his own health, he's also getting good news from the region that was under assault by various malefactors, I guess we could say. I think that Joan later on in his reign gets plenty of bad news, and it's at moments where he's perfectly healthy. But I wonder about how the rumor mill, and I guess you could say the vibes, factor in to some of the decision making on the part of the people causing trouble. If the rumors are spreading throughout the land that the king is in a weakened state physically, does that factor into someone's decision to take a risk by picking up their sword and trying to get away with something? And then if the king is reputed to be strong, does that just kind of general sense of like just the overall feeling of the time, the zeitgeist is the German term for that, is that something that actually does impact the decision making of people pretty far away and remote, but still thinking about how their actions are in defiance of the dominant political authority? And does it play a role in their just, I guess, general, their maybe even subconscious thought process about whether they're going to keep pressing for whatever reasons they have to fight and to resist and to dissent and to try to make gain, or whatever the motivations are of these bandos and whoever's causing what Joan calls the scandalos. Is it playing a role? I think it's an interesting question, and it's very much not answerable because we don't have, I think, documentation from them. And so we have this bureaucratic documentation instead. And we can maybe make some speculations about how we can see playing out here Ernst Kantorowicz's ideas about the way that medieval people thought of the health of the realm as very, very connected to the health of the king himself, the king's two bodies, right? So maybe it's worth throwing out there for sure, but it's not something you can like definitively say. It would certainly not be defensible from a historical argumentation point of view to say something along the lines of, Joan had recovered from his illness, and so the factions that were causing trouble in this mountainous place in Aragon, they heard that the king was strong again, and so that's what made them decide to lay off. No. I don't think we can go that far. I think we have to raise it as a possibility, and we can't, hang our hat on it. And that's been the whole game. That's been the way that we've encountered these documents since the very beginning of this project. We are coming to the last few episodes. And so as I start to look back on the sweep of this first 6 months of the reign of Joan and Violante, it's interesting to notice how there is actually more of a steady flow of problems. That it's not like, oh yay, the bandos in Aragon, they're settling down, so we're turning a corner. I really think that the pattern that we've been seeing in the first 6 months is one that really does hold, that there is kind of just like one thing after another, with instability here and rebellion there and financial difficulties there. So it is just, it's just a lot of problem solving, and the problems keep coming for Joan and Violante. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.